Centuries ago, in a small village in feudal Japan, a young girl resided with her stepfather. Her mother had passed away some months ago from a harsh disease, and her true father was killed in a farming accident, leaving her begrudgingly in the hands of her disinterested and cruel stepfather. He made her do all of the chores in the household, the cooking, the washing, and the laundry of the neighbors in return for food. He would also make her do anything else that he couldn't be bothered doing himself. One chore that the girl could not do herself yet was drawing water from the well. This required pulling a heavy bucket full of water to the top and then pouring it into a larger bucket, which was then carried back to the village. On this particular day, when drawing water from the well, something in the pail caught the stepfather's eye. It was a stunning hairpin made of fine metal and emblazoned with precious stones. This must be worth a fortune, he thought to himself, and something inside him stirred. He stared at his stepdaughter with his greedy, evil eyes and said to her, "I'm sending you down to the bottom of the well to see if there are any more jewels." The girl couldn't believe what she was hearing. She was terrified of cold, dark, and confined spaces, and the very thought of going down there completely terrified her. She knew what the alternative was, though, and she didn't dare cross her stepfather. Shaking like a leaf, she climbed into the bucket and held on tight as her stepfather lowered her into the black pit of the well below. Suddenly, the handle on the bucket snapped and she fell all the way down into the darkness until she was completely out of sight. The stepfather shouted down into the well, but it was not to inquire about her well-being. It was to ask if there were any more treasures down there. This was truly all he cared about. The girl had fortunately survived the fall and knew that if she didn't tell him she'd found more precious items, he would most likely leave her there to die. She told him there were indeed more treasures, the likes of which he couldn't possibly imagine. He shouted to her that he would send a rope down and for her to tie the items to it so he could pull them up. "What about me?" she shouted back. "Don't worry," he said. "After you send the treasures up to me, I'll lift you out." She didn't believe him. She told him to lift her out at the same time, but he wouldn't do it. This confirmed her belief that she couldn't trust him. She told him if he wanted the treasure, he would have to come down here and get it himself. This made him furious, and that's exactly what he decided to do. "You wait till I get down there," he screamed. "Then you'll wish you passed up the treasure first." Slowly he edged his way into the well and started to climb down. Then the rope snapped and he began to fall. The little girl watched in horror as she saw him free fall all the way down, face first into the water below with a huge splash and a blood-curdling snap as he broke his neck and died. She couldn't believe what had just happened. She looked into his dead eyes as his blood filled the water, half relieved he was dead and half terrified that she was trapped in the bottom of the well. The day slowly turned into night. She tried to climb out, but the wall was too slippery. She tried to scream out, but no one could hear her. Exhausted, she gave up, sat down, and cried. Soon after, she stopped sobbing and looked into her stepfather's eyes. She was furious at him for putting her in this situation. She was glad he was dead. Suddenly, he stared at her and smiled. She was completely petrified as the chilling look on his face tore through her like cold steel. Then he spoke. "You're going to die down here. Then we'll be together again. You'll be joining me soon." "No!" she screamed as she kicked him in the face. Then, when she looked down, he was as dead as he always was, still and completely lifeless. This made her more determined than ever to get out. She looked up. There was no way she could get out tonight. She felt the best thing she could do would be to summon her courage and ride out the night. In the morning, someone would come, and then she would be saved. She had a horrible, sleepless night. It was freezing cold, and out of the darkness came dozens of insects which spent the night crawling all over her face and body. Eventually, the next morning came, and she routinely shouted for help in the hope that someone eventually would hear her cries. And someone did. A man who was passing by heard her calls and looked into the well to investigate. He called down to her. "Are you okay?" he shouted. "I'm fine," she called back. "Please help me. I'm stuck down here." The man immediately got a strong rope and slowly lowered it down to her. She tied it around her waist, and he pulled her to the surface. She couldn't believe she was rescued. She was so happy to see this man who looked so kind. She hugged him and thanked him for saving her. He comforted her and told her that everything would be all right. For the first time in years, she truly felt safe. This feeling, however, was tragically short-lived, as once she realized what was in this man's wagon, a chill ripped through her, and she wished herself to be back in the bottom of the well. The little girl's feeling of freedom had been shattered. She felt sick to her stomach as she was thrown into the bamboo cage with the other girls and told to not make a sound. If she tried to escape, she would be killed on the spot and thrown in the fire. She had been captured by a group of bandits who roamed the countryside kidnapping young females. They then took them to the larger cities and sold them off as slaves to anyone who had the money. The bandits had set up a small camp and were planning their next kidnappings, which were to take place in the girls' village in the valley below. A villager who had made their way over to the well for water had heard voices as he was approaching, which he thought was unusual, so he had proceeded with caution. He hid behind a bush before coming any closer. He peered out from behind the bushes and closely observed the strangers and their camp. He didn't think much of them until he saw what they had trapped in the bamboo cage. Panicking, he quickly changed his mind about drawing water from the well and headed back down the hill to the village as quickly as possible. That night, as the rain began to fall, the little girl huddled between the others to try and stay warm. None of them dared speak as they all sat there cold, sad, and scared. The little girl wondered why life had treated her so badly. She missed her parents so much and wished them to be back in her life with all her heart. It was at that point she thought she heard someone calling her name. She slowly opened her eyes and looked into the darkness. There was someone there. As the figure slowly approached her, she tried to make out who it was. A feeling of terror overwhelmed her as her dead stepfather came into view and began to talk to her. "Don't worry, darling," he said. "This will all be over soon. They're not going to sell you off. They don't want you. I mean, they won't want you when you're dead." With this, the little girl screamed, and as her stepfather faded away, one of the bandits appeared out of the darkness and bashed his stick against the cage. "Shut up," he said. "One more word out of any of you and I'll cut your throats out." The other girls in the cage stared angrily at the little girl. She felt more miserable than ever and really did just want to die. The next morning, one of the bandits had been patiently scoping out the village and noticed that all of the villagers were congregating in the largest building right in the center. "This is perfect," he thought to himself. He went back to the camp and sat down with one of the others. They both agreed that this was going to be a great opportunity to surprise them and trap them all in one area and then kill off the men. That night, the bandits made their way down the hill to the village. And just as they were about to storm the building, the male villagers came out, all brandishing bamboo spears and all ready to fight. They had been expecting the bandits and were ready to defend themselves. One of the head villagers told them they were outnumbered and it would be in their best interest to just turn around and leave. The bandits weren't interested in leaving. They gave the villagers the option of surrender or death. The villagers had had enough. "This is your last chance to leave," they said, "or we will be forced to kill you all." "Kill us?" replied the bandits. "You're not killers. We are." And with that, the last thing the villagers heard was the sound of arrows flying through the air, right before they took out each and every one of them with incredible and brutal precision. 3 of the bandits were highly skilled archers and had been hiding in the dark, lining up their shots as the others drew the villagers out and into the open. Their plan had worked perfectly. All of the male villagers were dead. And now, not only did the bandits own the village, they also owned everything in it. The bandits, now in full control, relocated their camp from the top of the hill to the center of the village. They brought their other prisoners down with them and led them into the main building to be with the others. This was so they could keep them all in one place for the purposes of security and sorting. 2 of the bandits huddled them all together in one room and kept a watchful eye over them while the others made one of the ladies cook for them. As hungry as the women and children were, they didn't dare ask for anything to eat. The bandits spent the following several hours eating, drinking, and planning which of their prisoners would be coming with them, and which would have to be disposed of. Later into the night, the bandits began to fall extremely ill. Some of them suffered horrific stomach cramps which near crippled them with pain. Others felt so nauseous they began to vomit violently, and could not stop until the entire contents of their stomachs had been expelled. One, who was less affected than the others, accused the lady who cooked the food of poisoning them and told one of the men to take her outside and kill her. She vehemently denied the accusation. However, with a lack of any evidence to the contrary, her pleas fell on deaf ears, and she was led outside to be murdered in cold blood. The food was fine. Their sickness was in fact caused by the water they had drunk when they set up their camp at the well. The little girl's stepfather's bowels had released when he died, and the water was tainted with feces. A blood-chilling scream came from outside, and the women and children held each other, hoping that they wouldn't have to share the same fate, and that this ordeal would soon be over. To their surprise, the lady came running back into the building, clearly having been spooked by something. Behind her, the bandit slowly stepped back into the room and stood still. Blood began to drop onto the floor, followed by the bandit himself, revealing a large, deep slash to his back. 2 bandits reached for their swords and slowly pulled themselves to their feet. In the doorway, a lone samurai walked into the light and stared them down. On the previous day, when the villager had seen the bandits in their camp, he indeed raised the alarm with the others so that they could prepare, but he also headed off to the nearest town in order to get help. Fortunately for him, he met a samurai along the way. The bandits rushed at him, but they were no match, and with 2 swift slices, he had killed them both. The women saw this as their opportunity to rise up, and they wasted no time overpowering the remainder of the bandits, slaughtering them all with uncompromising rage and violence. All except for one. One had taken the little girl and threatened to slice her throat if they didn't let him go. The little girl looked up at her captor. Fear shot through her veins like razor-sharp shards of ice when she came face to face with her stepfather once more. He stared into her soul and told her how happy he was that she was about to die, for then they could be together forever. The little girl had other ideas. She pulled something from inside her clothes and stabbed the bandit right in the neck, severing his carotid artery, which caused blood to erupt from his wound, and his quick death to follow. He was dead. They were all dead. The samurai then noticed something very interesting about the object that the little girl had stabbed the bandit with. He picked it up and held it out to her. "This hairpin, where did you get this?" he asked. She explained that she took it from her dead stepfather when she was trapped in the bottom of the well. "Do you know who this belongs to?" he asked. "No," she said. "It bears the imperial seal," he told her. "It's extremely valuable. You'd better come with me." With no energy left to argue or fight, she submitted. They traveled for several days, over which the samurai took good care of her, ensuring she would reach the imperial palace clean and well fed. The palace was unlike anything she had seen in her entire life. It was so beautiful and yet so terrifying at the same time. She had no idea what was going to happen next, and felt she was either going to be imprisoned for her crime of stealing, or worse, executed. She was taken inside its walls to a beautiful garden, where a woman stood alone under a pagoda. She was asked to take the hairpin to her and explain herself. As she presented the hairpin, the princess was overcome with joy. She told the little girl of how she lost it down a well when she had stopped for a drink while traveling with her soldiers. She couldn't retrieve it at the time as they were needing to move quickly, but she had regretted it horribly and sent one of her samurai to get it. This was the same samurai who saved the little girl and her village. She hugged the little girl and thanked her for returning the pin to her, the pin that had once belonged to her mother. She said she could have anything in return, at which point the girl replied she just wanted to be loved. And she was, for the rest of her days, in the safety and security of the palace walls, never once being allowed to venture outside on her own again.